Zero and the show is Friday night debate.
And in that process of accepting people, introducing those people to Jesus Christ, introducing them to the steps and the precepts of Jesus Christ,
is disempowering for me. So, going back to being an African right now, if you talk to a young person in Africa and tell them to go back to the basics, I'll say go to farm.
Power Bank, which was established to say that we want youths to gain funds.
So I wish you can refer to me the examples of these extroverts that have made it today for us to prove and support your notion.
To really spend the time in doing the research and doing the innovation in order to get to the point where you can produce a new product for.
My name is Liru and the show is Friday Night Debate. So today in the studio I'm joined by two gents and a lady, and we are going to be debating on what basis is the West imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
May you please introduce yourself to the viewers.
Uzura Tobias, a citizen of Malawi.
I'm Judith Piri and I'm a citizen of Malawi.
I'm Teddy Move, and I'm a political commentator.
Okay. As a citizen of Bulawayo or a citizen of Zimbabwe, how are the sanctions affecting you?
I think that's a rather tricky one. Also, from the way I view things, breaking down the impact of the sanctions at the individual level is a bit tricky in the sense that, yes, the trickle-down effects may get down to the individual, but by and large, the impact of the sanctions is at the macro level. In the sense that because of the measures that have been imposed on Zimbabwe, you find that lines of credits are actually not accessible for the country. You also find that the inaccessibility of the lines of credit actually affects the macroeconomic performance, in the sense that industry cannot access assistance from outside the country. Financial houses find it very difficult to operate, and actually find that some of our corporates are actually under the measures. So in the long term, yes, the trickle-down effects of failure of performance by corporates, financial houses not accessing lines of credit and likes, actually ends up trickling down the individual in the sense that if they want to access, for example, employment for corporates that are not accessing finance, then those corporates cannot perform. So employment creation is actually truncated. And if the financial houses cannot affect lines of credit, it also means that they themselves cannot extend loans to individuals in the country.
Okay, I like that. How are the sanctions affecting you as a woman and as a girl child?
Okay, as it has already been said, sanctions are affecting us at micro level. So maybe as women, we want to start our own businesses. We want to export things out. But because of sanctions, we can't do that. So I think it starts at the micro level, then going down to the individual level. I can say that.
Okay. But before we get to Teddy, you mentioned that sanctions are affecting a number of companies. But when the West is imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, they are saying it is because there's been an abuse of human rights in Zimbabwe. That's why they are imposing those sanctions. And they also say those sanctions, they do not affect individuals. They do not affect the nation of Zimbabwe as a whole. They are targeting individuals. But now you are saying they are also affecting you as a citizen. So is that true, or where are we lacking the information?
Well, I think the issue that comes into play is that whenever any nation introduces policies, they have policy objectives and they have policy strategies. And when the measures were imposed, the West had its reasons behind the imposition of the measures, and they also had targets. That's why you find that to the West they actually call them targeted sanctions.
Yes.
Call them targeted measures.
Mm-hmm.
And The rationale, as they say, zeroes in on issues of human rights abuses and human rights violations, which is a fact on the ground. Zimbabweans have suffered. Zimbabweans have their rights abused. Their rights are being violated, left, right, and center. We cannot run away from that. But the bottom line is that at the end of the day, in any scenario, when a country has got measures imposed against it, one way or the other, the measures will end up affecting its citizens. Even if they are just targeted measures, targeted at individuals, they affect the foreign policy of the country against which measures are targeted. In the sense that its officials can no longer conduct their foreign policy in a free and fair manner. So at the end of the day, their failure to conduct foreign policy, their failure to interact with other nations in the global society means that they cannot do what they would have done for the citizens of their country under normal circumstances.
Okay. Teddy, as a political scientist, do you agree?
With what precisely? I think, let me take it back to the question of on what basis is the West imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe. I will respond firstly on the paradigm of human rights and prove how sanctions in and of themselves are a contradiction to the very notion that they claim to be advocating for. Because when you are placing sanctions on Zimbabwe, by definition sanctions are a coercive measure enforced to ensure compliance. And when you are talking about coercion, you are talking about an element of force. And an element of force on whom? The West and its allies has a tendency of creating discourses about sanctions. There are human rights violations in Zimbabwe, the sanctions are targeted, but that's just a gimmick of trying to convince each other and convince their citizens that they are doing the right thing in Africa. They are doing the right thing in everywhere where they go around doing all these bad things. But let us look at what sanctions are doing to the ordinary man. I tend to agree with Kuzura when he says that you can't separate the performance of macroeconomic institutions from the welfare of the individual, because in any case, the key drivers of development are macroeconomic institutions. And the first instance, when you label Zimbabwe as a bad guy, already you are saying Zimbabwe is not the right investment destination, firstly. Zimbabwe is not a safe space, secondly. And you are saying that whosoever wants to deal with Zimbabwe should do so at their own risk. Now let us come to the era that we live in. We live in an era where each and every nation is talking about development. And development in Zimbabwe cannot be separated from the development within the international context. Look at how macroeconomic projects are financed by international financial institutions. For example, Zimbabwe can't access loans from the IMF, Zimbabwe can't access bilateral loans. Countries, institutions that actually deal with Zimbabwe are penalized for dealing with Zimbabwe. And there are some projects which are long-term. For example, the construction of roads. When you are constructing roads, you need investment. For example, investment which can amount up to 20 billion, and that money might not be readily available in Zimbabwe, and you need big financial institutions to put in those resources so that gradually Zimbabwe can pay back the investment. For example, 20 billion, you can have a 20-year repayment period and so forth. So we can then come back again and say, targeting macroeconomic institutions is the reason why in Zimbabwe the economy is not growing. And when the economy is not growing, and when the formal sector is collapsing, even my sister here, who is a woman, ends up going to the informal sector because that's the only option that is there. Women, for example, I will comment on the part of women. Women are the most affected by sanctions in Zimbabwe in any case, because women are the ones who are then left with very limited options. There are no options for employment, there are no options for work. They end up having to resort to these small things, selling bananas and whatnot, just because the West is targeting Zimbabwe's macroeconomic institutions. But as we go, we will try and...
Okay. He also mentioned the issue of the violation of human rights. So isn't it one of the reasons why the West has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe?
The violation of human rights. like what criteria, which process did the United States of America and its allies, Euro-North American countries, come to the conclusion that there are human rights abuses in Zimbabwe? Fine, Zimbabwe has had its episodes like every other country in the world. In America, they shoot black people willingly, they strange them to death, they do all sorts of things. But does that warrant an action like sanctions on the general population? And in any case, I don't want to sound as if I'm denying the existence of the violation of human rights, but commenting from where I am and the researches that I have stumbled across, the question of human rights in Zimbabwe is a discourse that is used to propel or to justify the imposition of sanctions, not because there are actual human rights violations in Zimbabwe. Let's look at the narratives that we hear about on TV, on Twitter, and the propaganda machinery of the West and so forth. Some of the issues that we hear about in Zimbabwe, I stay in Zimbabwe, I've been in Zimbabwe all my life, but I cannot point to say a human right was abused today, a human right was abused today. But again, let me refer back to certain researches perhaps which were done by the likes of Professor Percy Sledge Chikora, who argue that the imposition of sanctions is actually the one that forced the regime to adopt survival strategies, because when you put a war, when you stage a war against Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe is had to defend itself. And this has created a state of emergency in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has had to suspend the respect of human rights in response to the sanctions. Because when Zimbabwe is under attack, Zimbabwe has had to defend itself. And part of defending itself has had to militarize its institutions, militarize everything, so that it doesn't succumb to an undemocratic agenda which is being pushed by the West.
Okay, so Zimbabwe is not the only nation that the West imposed sanctions on. So are we saying that, but some nations like Cuba, for example, they are doing better than Zimbabwe. So don't we have other problems beyond sanctions? I come to you.
Maybe if you could rephrase your question, when you say other problems beyond sanctions, what exactly are we zeroing in?
Okay, maybe we have got mismanagement of resources, for example.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, like you rightfully pointed, the economy has never reached the doldrums like ours has done. We've only been under sanctions for 18 years. Ian Smith's Rhodesia was under sanctions from 1967 to 1979. But if you check the history of economic performance in Zimbabwe, you'll find that when Ian Smith adopted import substitution, the Rhodesian economy actually bloomed better than it was before sanctions. That's where questions then emerge as to whether sanctions could really be the cause of our bad economic performance, or there are other issues at hand. And like you rightfully pointed out, our problems did not emanate from sanctions per se. We already were in problems before the measures were imposed. You want to trace the history of Zimbabwe's economic performance back to the 1980s, soon after independence, when despite the so-called golden decade of the 1980s to the 1990s, you find that in reality, yes, there was good performance, but things were already starting to go down. And one major issue which has been problematic in Zimbabwe since the 1980s is corruption. You want to look at the Paweni scandal. You want to look at the Ngurube scandal. You want to look at the Willow scandal. You want to look at the VVIP housing scandal. You want to look at the All Victims Compensation scandal. All those issues were prior to sanctions. So that all of those actually affected the economy. Not forgetting the unbudgeted for and unplanned DRC expenditure, DRC adventure, which actually drained the fiscus. Not forgetting the unbudgeted and planned for 1997 War Veterans 50,000 package, which was unbudgeted and unplanned, where overnight the fiscus was suddenly saddled with a huge amount which needed to actually own up to. Why? Because we are looking at issues of political expedience. where we have got a system that has actually been put into the corner and it tries to find a way of surviving, and the only way they could survive was through what? Through compensating or through gratifying the war veterans, so to speak. And that gratification of the war veterans has brought us where we are.
Isn't it okay, Teddy mentioned that, when you are put in a corner, you try to find ways to survive. So isn't it what Zimbabweans have adopted?
But why in the first place do you put yourself into a situation where you are put into a corner?
Teddy.
The war veterans protested because they had been promised compensation right from 1980, which was not honored. And in 1997, they were saying enough is enough. And they were threatening to march to State House. That's why they were then gratified with the $50,000 package.
Okay, the corner that I'm referring to is the sanctions, actually.
I want to trace it back. So I'm saying the issue of being put into a corner does not just happen overnight. It happens because of prior events. Human activity, human existence is not ahistorical. It is a product of history. And when you look at the issue of sanctions, people may want to say that Zimbabwe then suspended honoring human rights because of the sanctions. But if you want to trace, truthfully speaking, property rights were violated before sanctions. And I know people say the land is ours. That's very true. And we fought for this land. But if you want to look at people who bought land after independence, then lost the land in 2000, 2001. Why were they losing that land? Charleswood Farm in Manicaland is one very pertinent example, which was bought in 1983 by the late owner. Willing seller, willing buyer, the government turned down the seller. They said, we don't want that land. Bennett bought the land. Come 2000, he lost the land. Why was he losing the land? He did not acquire the land during the colonial era. He bought the land after independence. That's one example, right? Then you want to look at even the results of the land reform itself. What has happened to Kondozi Farm in Oz? What are the results of the land reform? We were the breadbasket of SADC. Now we are a basket case, right? Can we then claim that we were put into a corner or we brought ourselves where we are? Are we saying the land is no longer there to produce? If we farm, we produce our own seeds. All the inputs to produce fertilizer are available in Zimbabwe. So what is stopping us from producing?
I think
Okay,
there is more to the question of land. I think when we want to situate the issue of sanctions within the discourse of land, and when we want to question and say human rights were violated by taking back the land, I think we should start another debate and say, when the comrades picked up arms and went to war, when the comrades joined the liberation struggle, they went there for two things. Those two things were land, and the other one was political power.
Okay, for now let's
After
stick
political
to
power, yes. I'm trying to give it a historical perspective in the same manner through which he wanted to navigate the problem through a historical perspective.
Yes.
Because if we are going to have one perspective of history, we are going to reach a very dangerous conclusion.
Okay.
So let us have
Yes.
a diverse perspective of history so that we can trace events and see why we are here today. And another thing that we have to understand, when comrades got independence in 1980, the question of land still stood up to the year 2000. So when you say the war veterans marched wanting compensation, no, the war veterans did not march wanting compensation. Yes, compensation was part of it, because when the comrades went to war, when the comrades were demobilizing, the government, the nationalist leadership promised them, it made a policy position, it told them that you are going to be compensated. And they were within their right to claim that compensation. And then secondly, the taking back of land. The comrades went to war to fight for land. And the comrades were saying, we fought for land, where is that land? If you are not going to give us our land that we fought for, we are going to fight for our land, we are going to take it. And as for those people who whom you claim that bought the land during the period of 1980 and let's just put it at 1999. I think if you are an investor, I understand where the background through which is coming from. There were some heavy investments which were financed by multilateral institutions to say, let us finance farmers in Zimbabwe, let us make investments in Zimbabwe. But let us not pretend as if those people did not know that there was a land question in Zimbabwe during that period. And it was out in the open that the land question has not been resolved. And in any case, those that bought land, that land, they bought it from who? That's another question that we have to respond to. There were some Rhodesian ones who knew very well that their time was up and they did not want to lose on their investments. This is what they did. They took that stolen property from the colonial period, and to avoid losing, they sold it to other unsuspecting international investors. But in any legal regime, if you go to the United States, if you buy stolen property, it doesn't mean that it has now been sanitized, it's now the good property and your investment is safe. Those who bought land should have made better investment decisions. But I can't blame them. They had their human rights violated, yes. And we are in the new dispensation now. You can see some policy initiatives where we have seen compensation of those kind of farmers who had lost that kind of investment. So we are not saying that the land reform did not violate certain property rights. It did violate certain property rights, but the land reform, again, we should understand it as a period which was not a normal period. And then now, let us come to the performance of the agricultural sector. One thing that we can't run away from, like how Kuzura rightfully puts it, to say you can't destabilize macroeconomic institutions, remove Zimbabwe from financial streams, international, and cripple the domestic resource basis, to say you strike the RBZ and there is inflation in Zimbabwe, local institutions can't finance local programs. Agriculture is a backbone of Zimbabwe's economy, and it being a backbone, the reason why white commercial farmers were performing better is because they were linked to monetary institutions, international investors, and they were linked to banks. They could go to banks and ask for money, and after asking for money, they would invest it back and till that land. And soon after the black farmers were given land, this is when we come to the debate, sanctions. Sanctions on Zimbabwe said, don't invest in Zimbabwe, don't buy Zimbabwean commodities. And these are the people that are targeted by sanctions. Now, this is the common man who is now being targeted by the sanctions, because when we say don't throw investment in Zimbabwe, the person who needs investment is the small-scale farmer, the black farmer who just benefited from the land reform. And in any case, there are researches on the ground, like to say there are only some political elites who benefited from the land reform. There are some findings, for example, by the likes of Professor Senmoyo and the likes of Teresa Smarts, this other white woman, whom I believe she had a sober perspective of the issue. Research indicates that in as much as it is true that the land reform benefited the so-called political elites, 90% of the land went to the general populace. And that is evidence, that is manifest, that can be proved even in sectors like the tobacco industry. You can even see that with small-scale farmers who are now subsistence farmers. But to agree with Kuzura now to say, why are we not being productive? The question of why we are not being productive should not be pointed to the land reform. Whether we are productive or we are not productive, the land reform still remains true. The reason why we are not productive is because the period through which we acquired our land, we did not have a definite policy position to say what is our agricultural policy so that we ensure productivity of our land. For example, the crops that were being farmed by the new black farmers, they were doing subsistence farming. White commercial farmers were doing market crops. So this is one thing that we then now see coming to the new dispensation, where we have precise policy positions by the new dispensations like the command agriculture, where we are giving inputs to the general farmers so that they can utilize that land, and we're giving direction and researches are done on their behalf, and they are giving prescriptions on which crops they can grow. So in any case, to see the success of any land reform program, studies indicate that you cannot make a conclusion. It can take not less than 25 years for you to point that the land reform was a success. And even sanctions that were imposed to derail the third Chimrenga, which is the land reform, they are proving to be failing. And hence we see some people now coming back through the back door, nicodemously approaching the government so that they can secure their future in Zimbabwe.
I guess you want to engage before we go to the audience.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the issues that Ted is bringing about. And as much as I agree with him on the availability of research evidence, that may seek to actually maybe support the status quo, you'll find that the situation on the ground, we cannot run away from it. Our land reform program was a success as far as taking land away from the whites is concerned. And kudos to the establishment for that. But as far as all the other expected results are concerned, our land reform program is a failure. Ted speaks about the research on the historicity of the land basin in Zimbabwe. And coincidentally, in my other life, I'm a researcher. Chigora and Buzura 2008 gave a paper entitled The History That Hounds the Present Generation, where they try to trace how the radicalization from 1888, the Morris Carter Commission of 1914, the Land Apportionment Act 1931, and other attending land policies have brought us to be where we are, which is an indisputable fact. Our land was robbed from us. And after independence, the major reason actually for going to war was to take back our land. But the problem that I get is that after signing of the Longest Hours Agreement in 1979, the willing seller, willing buyer basis was in existence for 10 years. Meaning as from 1990, we had all the power and all the rights to take back our land. But we did not. And a big why should be posed there. Why did we not take our land starting from 1990? When the 10-year clause in the Longest Hours Agreement had lapsed. Because it was not politically expedient for us to do so. Things were still okay, things were still comfortable. Why were the Shoshe people removed from the land and accused of being squatters in 1996, 1997 by the government? The same government that then used the same Shoshe people to go and invade farms when it became politically expedient for them. Those are questions that clearly show that in as much as the land question was a valid point, it was used for political expedience. That is why you'll find that the first land reform program only started after the February 2000 referendum, which brought about a no vote. And it became politically expedient to punish the whites for campaigning against a yes vote. Number one. Number two, having repossessed our land, in as much as we can say when we repossessed the land, we had no firm policy on the ground. But immediately thereafter, we put in place a number of policies which have only served to expose how corrupt the establishment is. Farm mechanization program, what happened? Where are the machines? If today we were to try and trace them, will we get them? Can we see any results from the farm mechanization program? 2017, November, December, if you remember what was in the news. I'm very glad, my sister, you are a journalist. Tons and tons of seed were found at Joseph Made's farm. It was rotting. Why? Just because I'm in position, I can collect as much as I want, but I don't put it to use. Because power is gratifying. That is the biggest problem that we have with our ruling elites. They want to amass as much as they can without putting it to use. I said farm mechanization. Let's go to command agriculture. Where are the results of command agriculture?
Parliament up to now has got questions over the 3 billion that cannot be accounted for by Treasury. Where is that money going to? Where are the results of the farm maker of the command agriculture? Now we are talking Mfumvudza. You know, one unfortunate thing about our country is we are very good at drafting policies. But when it comes to implement them, we don't implement them fully. Why? Because we only implement them as much as they benefit us, the ruling elites. So as far as land reform program and its success and failures are concerned, let's not try to beat about the bush. The program has been a failure. Why? Because we can no longer feed ourselves. From being a bread basket, we are now a basket case, like I've already said. We are now importing everything that we used to produce locally. No year since 2000 have we ever been able to feed this Zimbabwean population from harvest to the next harvest. Every year we are now harvesting. Even when we have got abundant rains. And if you remember very well, to just show the lack of our firmness in policy making and policy implementation. I don't know how many of us remember the famous trip by Joseph Made by helicopter. When he went around the country and proclaimed that this year the country is going to have a bumper harvest. But that very same year, the country did not harvest enough to feed the country for 3 months.
Okay, so in as much as we need to put our house in order, we still have a bigger problem, which is sanctions. Teddy, I know you want to engage.
I think to respond to what Kuzura is saying.
And after that, we'll give the lady a chance.
To respond to what Kuzura is saying. Kuzura is giving birth to a bigger problem that is in Zimbabwe. One thing that we can't avoid in this debate is that Zimbabwe has always been in problems. Fine, Rhodesia might not have had problems because Rhodesia was not Zimbabwe. And there were Zimbabweans in Rhodesia. Rhodesia was a group of secular whites who were in Zimbabwe and who were enjoying white privilege and who were enjoying the economy in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe was there. Zimbabwe was in poverty. Zimbabwe was in rural areas. Zimbabwe had no schools. Zimbabwe had no public hospitals. And that problem was not identified. Within the discourse of public policy making, there is the process of problem identification. And one thing that the Rhodesian government was successful in doing was not identifying black problems as Rhodesian problems. Zimbabwean problems were there before 1980, and the Rhodesian government successfully made it a point that Zimbabwean problems are not identified as problems. Come to 1980, when the nationalist governments take over Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe becomes Zimbabwe, we now begin to identify problems. And one of the problems that we identified within the context of public policy was that in Zimbabwe we needed development. The Zimbabweans needed schools. The Zimbabwe needed education, that which you refer to as populism. Zimbabwe needed subsidy because we couldn't have treated black people as if they were emerging from privilege. We couldn't have treated black people as if they were, they had access to whatsoever. So the question of policy now, to say, fine, the problem was there, the problem was that Zimbabwe was underdeveloped. The Zimbabwe that I'm referring to is our Zimbabwe, the one that got independence. The problem was, how do we implement policies? And you have to understand that the problem that was there in Zimbabwe was that Zimbabweans were not allowed to make policies for themselves. The policy implementers who makes policies in Zimbabwe, it's not the political leadership that makes policies. Those ones, they draft policies. We make the question of making policies. If you say you can't drive at 120 or more here, it's not the person who says that who will make that policy. It's the person who will drive below 120 who is making that policy. That is the aspect of making a policy, making it. That is practicalizing it. And in Zimbabwe, when you talk about Made being this, Made being that, the bigger question is not Made was a successful person in doing whatever that you accuse him of doing. The question is, where was everyone? And what was the process that actually elevated or allowed them to do that? That is the question that we should be responding to. And the problem that is the weakness of that process, or that process is weak, or they are an outcome of that process which we all have to address, which is a national problem. The problem of policy making in Zimbabwe. The policies that end up going up are not the policies that are good.
You can't say we draft good policies, but those policies can't be implemented. If a policy can't be implemented, it's not a good policy in the first place. If you say you are going to give people 1 million each, fine, it's a populist, it's not a good policy if you are not going to give them. So the process of making policies in Zimbabwe is the one that we're supposed to talk about. And the reason why there is rampant corruption is not because the political elites want to be corrupt or are so good in corruption. It's because our institutions are weak. And why our institutions weak? It's not because those guys want them to be weak, whosoever women think that they are making the institutions weak. It's because Zimbabwe is coming from a very dark history where our institutions were deliberately weakened so that satanic projects like colonialism, satanic projects like Rhodesian policies can stay up. So I think this is one thing that we have to understand. And then coming to the question of the success of command agriculture. How old is command agriculture, and we are talking within which context? And if you talk about 3 billion which went into agriculture, I can refer you to the European Union, which invests an annual budget of close to 70 billion per year subsidizing farmers. Agriculture in the European Union is subsidized on a basis of, with an amount exceeding 70 billion. So one thing that you can take away is that agriculture should be subsidized. Of course, when you will be listening from, when the media, for example, the media has a tendency of scandalizing issues. The media may scandalize issues firstly on the basis that for media narratives to sell, for their papers to sell, things have to appear scandalous. You can't just not scandalize and spice issues. So the media, if the 3 billion was spent, they would have to scandalize it so that their papers sell. And then the second element of the media is that you can't run away from the fact that Zimbabwe is polarized today. And the media is there and the other one is there. You will never reach a point where anti-establishment media outlets will glorify a government policy. They will try by all means to scandalize. And I can tell you about command agriculture. Command agriculture benefited the common man in rural areas. If we talk about Fumuta is not really about giving inputs. Fumuta is a direct response to climate change and educating the farmers, the small-scale farmers in rural areas. So gradually we are getting there. Like I'm saying, the success or failure of the land reform in Zimbabwe is yet to be confirmed. But with the trajectory that we are in now, it appears that Zimbabwe is in the right direction. This is why I'm saying this. As opposed to the past, this is when I will bring the youth, the likes of Ivan here. I don't think that, as is the case in the year 2000, when my auntie, who probably never had an access to the phone and whatsoever, did not have access to the markets, did not have access to the what was in possession of land, could have made anything. But now the new dispensation is giving land to the likes of Ivan, who can utilize that land. Now we have moved. In the year 2000, there were very few people who were educated with regards to running farms. Now we have universities that have graduates. We have an enabling environment. So with or without the government, the land reform is going to be a success. Whether the government wants, whether the West wants or they don't want, the land reform is going to be a success because the land reform is not about the political parties in question. The land reform is not about the West. The land reform is about Zimbabwe. The land reform is about the Zimbabweans. So
okay.
I think that's the case that we have to
now I'm afraid this debate is now turning into a blame game, or we are now focusing on land reforms more than the sanctions. But I would really wanted to respond to what Teddy said. He said the media is biased. Is that true?
In a way it is, because the media in Zimbabwe is polarized. There are two camps. There are those who are for government and there are those who are against government. But maybe covering things like sanctions which are affecting the country as a whole, the media has to come together and work together, regardless of those who are for the government and regardless of those who are against the government, because this is an issue which is affecting everyone in the country.
So of course we need to put our house in order. I'll come back to you.
Sure, we understand that there is a long history in how sanctions came to be and
how the government made the right decisions or the wrong decisions. We get all that. But as a new generation, we do not want to worry about the history, we want to worry about the now. And looking at our government, sure, we have the new dispensation, giving up new laws, which seem to be, you know, in the advantage of the new generation and all that. But we keep asking ourselves questions because, for example, I'm a tech enthusiast, I'm a web dev, I'm a coder, I'm everything like that. But we rely on foreign services, we rely on foreign investment, right? So when our foreign investor, when angel investor A says, what are you doing in Zimbabwe? Can I throw you $1 million? They automatically look into the policy we're giving. And as we've seen in the government, we have good laws and then the bad laws. For example, when they try to phrase a law saying you're not allowed to campaign against one's own country and it's a crime. Reading that law, you find that is so broad and everything. And then we have the political tyranny. This is what we call it now. When we have the youth are being arrested for literally campaigning for something that they believe in. Our investors run away. So what is the government doing about that to bring back investment into Zimbabwe? Because as much as we rely on agriculture as a country, we have to pivot. We have to shift into things like technology and blockchain, which is all coming up. What do you think the government should do as the panel to really bring back investment into the country?
I'll start with you, Ted.
I think to respond to what Ivan is saying, we should firstly respond to the question of who is the government. And is the government a group of individuals or is the government a representation of Zimbabwe? So let us look at the question of the abductions, the whatsoever. I wouldn't want to confirm or deny the legitimacy of those things, but I would rather want to agree that to some extent they influence the attitudes of investors. But it's not only Zimbabwe which has those cases, but investors still go in those countries. Which then goes back to the question of sanctions to say, Zimbabwe has been profiled as a suspect. You know the usual suspects, the like of North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, and so forth. Those are the countries that are victims of the West's propaganda machinery, who have been profiled as the bad guys. And automatically investors are not comfortable coming to Zimbabwe. Now let us look at the question of technology and the new generation, the fourth industrial revolution. I would want to contextualize the debate within the fourth industrial revolution. Zimbabwe has not made a position against tech development. Zimbabwe has not promulgated any policy that says you can't be innovative. In any case, what is stopping you from being innovative is the fact that in Zimbabwe we have a smaller economy. When we have a smaller economy due to sanctions, we can't invest in advanced programs. So in America the opposite is true. But again, to bring it back, again when you talk about the new laws which you want to label as draconian, to say you can't campaign against your own country. You can't campaign against your own country. We might differ on everything, but we should agree on the idea of Zimbabwe. Go to America, there is the Logan Act. You are an American citizen, you can't campaign against America outside the American context. Where is Edward Snowden today? Is that the ideal democracy that we're talking about? So yes, if you are Zimbabwean, you have to stand by us. Even in our constitution, it is clear when we talk about the termination of citizenship in Zimbabwe, if we are in a war with another country and you choose that other side, automatically we have terminated your citizenship. It's within the constitution. And for example now, Zimbabwe is in an economic war with the West under the brand of sanctions. And someone may choose to go and say, we want sanctions to be imposed on Zimbabwe. Is it not a mutual perspective that sanctions are affecting everyone? Sanctions are negatively impacting Zimbabwe. And a Zimbabwean may go and advocate for the imposition of sanctions to Zimbabwe. Do you think we can coexist with that person? I'm not trying to emerge as an intolerant person, but I think when you make a choice, you have to live within the confines of your choices. When you declare you are part of us, you should be part of us. When you declare that you are against us, you should find ways of existing outside the context of Zimbabwe, because you can't be claiming to be Zimbabwean, yet you are advocating for harmful activities against Zimbabwe internationally.
Can I add on a question to that? The reason why we mention these laws as the youth is because we become afraid. We want a voice. And unfortunately, the situation of Zimbabwe, we have certain individuals who become the government. For example, when you say so-and-so was the minister of so-and-so or the head of what department, they become the government. And the law sees us, in fact, as the evil person. The reason why we become scared of this and rather choose to go into South Africa where we become foreigners and all that is because we do not see any security. From the year 2018, with a new constitution which was never implemented, the 2018 constitution, where we have drafts and it's changed into this new constitution like within this year, we become afraid to have a voice. And this is where we start asking you as people who are political commentators to give us guidance and all that. What do we do in a country where we feel like we're losing voice?
I think what Ivan is saying is a very valid point that any normal government should put into perspective, because whether he is right or whether he is wrong, that's his position, and his position will influence how he comes out as a citizen of Zimbabwe. And I think the government of Zimbabwe should take a bold move and identify what Ivan is feeling as a policy problem, because for Ivan to be a productive citizen, he needs to feel safe. Whether Ivan feels unsafe because of imagined or real factors, the bottom line is Ivan feels that he is not safe. And I think the government right now is in a better position to convince. It is upon government to convince everyone. The role of every government in any social contract is to convince its citizens that you are safe. Government now has to play its, or has to fulfill its obligations within the social contract. One of the obligations of the state in the social contract is to protect the citizens. The core obligation of every state is to protect its citizens. And when citizens don't feel protected, it means that the government has to rethink how it is protecting its citizens. Because protection is not all about making sure that people are safe. It's also about making sure that people feel safe. And I think now, more than ever, the new dispensation is doing everything possible. We have seen even how the 2018 elections were conducted. People were allowed to vote. People felt that they expressed their voices, and the elections were free and fair, endorsed by international bodies and local bodies. Even if you check even the political environment now, it's very funny that someone can be expressing his democratic right of free speech to say that they don't have free speech. Isn't that a very interesting paradox? You are claiming that there is tyranny, which is stopping you from saying, from expressing yourself freely. But you are expressing your democratic right by saying that you are not free. So there is a lot of secret privilege. You know, whenever you find people saying that they are oppressed, be very suspicious of secret privilege. Be very suspicious of secret privilege. Look at the opposition in Zimbabwe. They say in Zimbabwe there is no democracy, but they are the opposition.
Okay, that is another debate altogether. Okay, let's get to you as a journalist. Would you want to engage to what you said?
Okay, maybe also as a young generation, I understand some of the problems he's highlighting. Maybe because of our government, there are no much youth in the government who are there to understand some of these challenges that the youth are currently facing. So maybe that generational gap is a challenge. So maybe youth, because of technology, they can air their views, they can air their challenges, but maybe government is not much focused on that right now.
Or rather, maybe it's not being done the proper way, because you just go on Facebook, you see someone just saying anything to anyone.
That's true.
Okay.
So maybe they are focusing maybe on bigger issues that are affecting the country. So maybe the youth's problems are kind of on hold for now, because maybe, looking at sanctions, youth are complaining maybe about technologies and all that, but because we're faced with bigger problems, that's what government then focuses on. I think so.
Okay. Okay, I'll come back with a question. Is it possible for us to focus on sanctions and then also focus on ourselves, like you as on the youth as well? Because at the very end of the day, sanctions are like the bigger elephant in the room. Okay, but before we answer that, may you please answer Ivan?
Ivan has got very valid points. And to respond to that, I want to reiterate and touch on what Ted said about policy making and policy implementation, where he ended up unfortunately misquoting me. I said we have got very brilliant policies on paper, but we are very bad in implementation. We have got very brilliant blueprints that we unfortunately fail to implement, leading to failure of development in the country. And in line with that, I want to look at a scenario where I'll say that November 2017 was a brilliant idea, wrongly implemented. Right. Why am I saying that? We find that since November 2017, in the so-called, I'll say so-called new dispensation, we have been indicating right and telling left. That's our biggest problem with regards to what Ivan said. Like right now, he is very correct when he says the youth are very eager to get involved in development, but the environment is very restrictive. Why? Because the political space is not open enough and conducive for them to participate. Like she rightly pointed out, we have got a geriatric cabinet. That's a fact. So youth representation is non-existent in cabinet. Their views automatically are not there, they are never heard. They are never put on the table, if I can put it that way. That's issue number one. Issue number two, the legislative environment is also not conducive. Like right now we've got the cyber security bill. Read that bill and tell me that we can have a technology industry that can succeed in Zimbabwe. That's a non-starter. Right. So you'll find that at the end of the day, what we say and what we do are two different things. And the major reason why things will continue on a downhill, I'm very happy Ted rightly pointed out that government's duty is to safeguard the interests of its citizens. And one of its duties is to make sure that we should not suffer from these sanctions even if they are there. And they have failed in that regard. Fidel Castro, Raul Castro after him, were able to actually protect the Cubans from sanctions. The Kim family have been able to protect North Koreans from sanctions. Why are we not doing the same in Zimbabwe? Where is the problem? Because the problems that we have in Zimbabwe that are compounding the problem of sanctions are not existing in other countries. Cuba has got no corruption in the levels of Zimbabwe. North Korea has got no corruption in the levels of Zimbabwe. They do not have neo-patrimonialism to the extent of Zimbabwe. Where if you are not connected, no matter how qualified you may be, you will never enjoy the benefit of your academic prowess. That's the biggest problem that we have in Zimbabwe. Neo-patrimonialism, gerontology. That's everything zeroes in down to that. And you find that if you look at where we are and where we have come from, in as much as people would want to participate, they do not participate. Why? Because time and again we are told, Chinu chedu. You see, I always remember and recollect in Oliver Mtukuzi's song. As long as we do not rectify that problem, we'll keep moving in circles. And the biggest problem is that we are always finger pointing. We never accept that we are wrong, as the ruling elites. We always find fault with everyone else except ourselves.
Okay, now I feel like you are answering to Teddy more than you are answering.
No, I'm not answering. What I'm saying, the problem is that the policies that are on paper are not being implemented to protect him and to promote his innovativeness.
In two sentences, in just two sentences.
Yes, Ted.
Kuzura should also clarify when he says we should address who is we. The bigger problem in Zimbabwe is the question of defining who is Zimbabwe, becoming Zimbabwe.
Can I quickly respond to that?
Okay, you can quickly respond to that and then we wrap up, right?
Gacheni in 2009 has got a brilliant publication. Do Zimbabweans exist? That answers our question. We have got nothing called a Zimbabwean. We have got the people who live within a territory called Zimbabwe. But do they really believe and accept that they are Zimbabweans? Okay. They don't. Why? Because they've never been made to feel that they are Zimbabweans. Right?
By who?
By the ruling elites. I'll just give two contrasting examples. The Nguni in Zimbabwe say they wanted to recreate the Ndebele state. They were told, no, you can't. The Roche said they want to reincarnate the Mambo dynasty. They were given the go ahead. The Mambo was installed. That's food for thought. Why do you accept one and reject the other? So, at the end of the day, we don't feel that we belong. They belong, we don't belong.
Yes. And it is also convenient within the populist rhetoric to create a suspicious, or to construct an enemy on behalf of the people to justify the existence of a problem. It is convenient in any populist establishment to create the image of a bad government to justify the existence of a problem. But it is because of those simplistic answers since time immemorial. They said Mugabe was the problem, the ideological background of Kozura, the one that I'm picking.
No, I don't accept that was the problem. Yes. The problem is Mugabeism, not Mugabe.
Yes.
The system that Mugabe created, that we are in, is the problem. The same system that finds it convenient to blame everyone else except the problem.
That system is an outcome of a process, and that process is rooted in this. We should define Zimbabwe. I disagree very much with Professor Sabelo Kacheni. I don't believe much in his writing because he's a historian, and much of the things that he writes lack scientificity, like historical accuracy. There is no science in most of his writings. So the question of do Zimbabweans exist should be the question of becoming Zimbabwe in light of what Gerald Nazareth is talking about, to say, how can we construct the nation Zimbabwe? We should not be saying, where is Zimbabwe? We should be saying, let us make Zimbabwe. That is the question that we are supposed to be responding to, not the question of do Zimbabweans exist. No, Zimbabweans did not exist because of colonialism. Zimbabweans did not exist because of the colonial literature that was used to define them. The one which was constructed by the white settler regime which wanted to justify colonialism, hence destroyed the idea of Zimbabwe. Now we are at the phase of defining Zimbabwe and making Zimbabwe. So I don't believe in the question of do Zimbabweans exist. I believe in the questions of becoming Zimbabwean.
Okay, thank you so much, Ivan.
Teddy say, becoming Zimbabwe is answering the question do Zimbabweans exist. We have to become Zimbabwe because we are not Zimbabweans.
Because we're coming from
because we are not Zimbabweans. The reason,
not because of
the reason, no, whatever the reason may be, we are not Zimbabweans, so we have got to become Zimbabwe. That's why Sabelo says, do Zimbabweans exist? And the answer is no. So how do we become Zimbabwean? We have to inculcate a national value-laden ethos where we all agree on what it means to be a Zimbabwean. We should not have any imposition of what it means to be a Zimbabwean, which is unfortunately what is currently happening.
Okay, gents, I like all this, but for now, we still have sanctions. Okay, so I mean, how can we, now we need to unite and fight sanctions, because whether you agree with the system or not, they are still affecting you, right? So what do we do from your own perspective?
Well, the answer that I will give comes from what I just said. As long as we do not agree on what it means to say I am a Zimbabwean, we will never be able to agree on the issue of sanctions. Why? Because I will say the sanctions is affecting them more than me, because we are not equals.
Because isn't it because you don't have the knowledge of how they are affecting you?
No. Having the full knowledge, the fact that the system still separates us in our suffering from the sanctions makes it very difficult for us to agree on the sanctions.
But do you know that if we go like this, because already the West who are imposing sanctions on us, if we tackle it like this, they will see that there are some loopholes. I think for now, we need to be united and fight sanctions, and then we'll come back to our problems.
Well, as much as I agree on that, you know, being united is not something that can be imposed on people. Okay. Being united is a product of consensus building. And consensus building in a polarized environment requires very brilliant acumen in our leadership. which unfortunately at the moment does not exist.
Okay. Teddy.
Yes, I think when we are talking about sanctions and fighting sanctions, like how Kozura rightfully says it, we need to have a shared perspective on the idea of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is
Yes.
just because a certain political figure in government said Chimichedu, it does not mean Liru is excluded from that Chim. If the president says Chimichedu, if the opposition leader says Chimichedu, you also have to stand up and say Chimichedu, because Zimbabwe is for all of us. Chimichedu, Zimbabwe, Chimichedu, all of us. And in the case of defining Zimbabwe, I should say, the task that is laden, particularly upon the academia, is that of deontologizing the Zimbabwean, to say the Zimbabwean who is currently existing is an outcome of a very toxic literature which is polarizing them. A very toxic literature which tells you that you are Ndebele, you are not Zimbabwean, you are Shona, Ndebele is your problem. You are MDC, he is Zan. You are this, you are a woman, I'm a male. So we need an academia which can construct literature that creates Zimbabwe. The constructionist theory tells us that even America is not those buildings. America is an idea, and that idea has been created by the academia.
So, James, are you saying we are not ready to tackle sanctions?
We can tackle sanctions, but our tackling of sanctions now, we should agree firstly. I think sanctions should be both a blessing and a curse in the first instance. Sanctions are a curse, yes, because they forced us into a corner and showed us that we have a common enemy. Now that they've showed us that we have a common enemy, us moving together to confront those sanctions will make us one. So we should confront sanctions as a collective and use them as a point of uniting as a nation. So that is what I'm saying. The media, for example, come 25 October, all of us in Zimbabwe will be saying sanctions must go, and all and so forth. The media, we want to see that media house which will not comment. That is the area where we need to focus on, where we need to unite and say, let us become Zimbabwe. So the bigger question that I would leave before I sign off is that let us become Zimbabwe. And becoming Zimbabwe means that we should find that which unites us. And one way of doing that is, let us not be paranoid about things that are going wrong. Let us be fascinated also about things that are right. Let us see something good even if it's coming from ZANU. Let us see something good even if it's coming from MDC. That is the starting point. We should shun this polarization, and we should not see each other as enemies. We should avoid this Nazi philosophy of defining politics, to say politics is the process of distinguishing between enemy and friend, the rest is public administration. No, politics is about governance. Governance requires unity. You can't implement a policy. Even if government comes with a brilliant policy, it can't implement it in a polarized environment. So we should define politics. So politics, we should forget about Laswood, we should forget about Carl Schmitt, we should forget about everyone and have our own definition. I think politics should be about chimichelu. Politics, chimichelu in Zimbabwe. That is the definition of politics. We can't respond to the national question outside the nationalist project. That is what I'm saying.
You didn't say much, but I guess you were learning.
Yes.
Last words.
Maybe for sanctions, I can say maybe together we can. So if we unite regardless of our political affiliation, regardless of gender, regardless of the generational gap, together the old and the young, we unite against sanctions, against maybe there's something great can come out of this.
Okay. So I guess no one has more to say. You want to say?
Well, I think at least I agree with Ted. One problem that we have that actually prevents us from...
You are starting the debate.
No, I'm actually concluding. So I'm saying I agree with you.
Okay.
We agree.
Our biggest problem is our toxic past.
Okay.
Zimbabwe as a nation, or as a state, or as a country, was actually, we are not a nation, we are a country, is a product of epochs of violence. And those epochs of violence have never been healed. And that violent past is what is the toxic nature of our politics. And I fully agree with Teddy there. As long as that toxicity exists, we'll never be able to sit on one table and agree. And to just point on that, one unfortunate aspect that has actually damaged any efforts towards re-engagement locally is the partisan nature in which we approach everything Zimbabwean. For example, on the 25th, if you just want to see what I'm trying to demonstrate, put on your blue zip t-shirt, the Zimbabwe Party for Prosperity, and join the sanctions people. You will not be welcome. Why? Because you find that on Sunday people will be putting party regalia, yet it's a national event. That's one big problem that we have. We approach everything from a partisan, blind partisan line. Whatever we do, like you rightfully pointed out, we are buying. You are either with us or you are not with us. You are either ZANU or you are MDC. So that has inculcated a sense of enmity amongst the Zimbabweans. So that should be our first step. We need to actually have a lot of civic engagement and civic education where we can inculcate the Zimbabwean national ethos into each and every person who lives between the Zambezi and the Limpopo. That we can agree on what it is that we really aspire to be, so that we can move from where we are. And once we do that, we'll find that Zimbabweans really don't care who rules them, for your own information. All they care is about having adequate food on the table. Even if we've got party Z ruling, as long as that party does what people want, people will be very happy. They don't care which party is in power. The common people, they simply want food on the table. And that was clearly demonstrated on the 24th of November 2017, when everyone went to the National Sports for ED's inauguration. And coincidentally on that day, if you check, people were not in party regalia. But after that, people suddenly assumed their party regalia. Why? Because already talk within party lines was already starting that this is our thing. And Chinamasa is to blame for that. Serious. He said, this is our thing, we are not going into a GNU.
Okay, obviously, we wouldn't want to point people out like that.
So on that one. But what I simply want to point was that where we had a very brilliant starting point, we suddenly destroyed that starting point and went back to our party lines. Yes, and that's what we need to mend. Okay. Let's forget our parties and our approach. Let's unite, let's work together, and these sanctions can easily be destroyed.
Yes. And to conclude what Kozura said, when Chinamasa said the point that then exacerbated the issue of polarization, there were some people who participated in the November 2017 brilliant movement with anticipation of a GNU, and when they saw that the GNU is no longer coming, they went back to their party regalia. So we should also give a double perspective to say it's not only Chinamasa who said Chincheni, it's also others who then said Chincheni, and they distinguished themselves from the national project. And with that, I think
thank you so much, James. Thank you so much. I'm from this debate, I'm gathering that we need to have more talks about our nation, about Zimbabwe. But for now, I think we need to just unite and fight the sanctions. Yes. For now. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, viewers, for watching. And remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's at Friday Night Debates. Do leave your comments below. And remember to take care of others and yourselves as well. From me, it's bye for now.